Hey everybody, I'm Eric Rodriguez, CFP and founder of WealthBuilders LLC, an independent wealth management firm helping people in or near retirement secure their financial future with life-centric financial planning and smart, values-aligned investing. I was recently featured in a conversation with Thomas Moore, who's the head of Betterment for Advisor Solutions, where I shared the behind the scenes of how I built my firm WealthBuilders from the ground up by focusing on people first, not just portfolios. In this interview, I break down the planning process I use to help clients feel confident in their retirement plan, the philosophy that drives every decision we make, and why life-centric advice is the future of financial planning. If you want to understand what makes working with a financial planner like me different, or you're curious about how real financial planning actually works, then this video is for you. Let's dive in.
When you think about wealth builders and the services you provide, how do you feel like what you're doing is differentiated? Or how would you, I guess, position yourself alongside another RIA?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. When it comes to how I run the business, I always lead with a financial life plan first. So no matter what, I want to make sure that we're taking a holistic process that's putting clients' interests first and that we're focusing on increasing their sense of well-being and life satisfaction, because that's what it's all about. If we're not doing that, I mean, what's the point, right? We can have a gazillion dollars, but if you're just not satisfied, you don't have work-life balance, you have, kind of negative thoughts when it comes to money, it's going to be really hard to have a really successful relationship with your overall wealth planning and goal attainment. So I think life planning is a huge part of what I do that might be different than others. And also just being myself and being my most authentic. Everyone calls me Erod, a lot of my friends. So just being Erod, just being my most authentic self to people. I think what's really changed over the last few years is being more organic with my personality and the way I deliver advice and not being so corporate. And I think when people come in to meet with me, they see me more as a friend, not just a financial planner. They buy into the relationship I'm trying to build. They can feel that I care about them and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I think they sense that. I wear, my values proud and loud, right? I'm not afraid to talk about politics. I'm not afraid to talk about my beliefs. And I think that for some people, that's a breath of fresh air and it could be a differentiator, in my opinion.
You didn't tell me about Erod. I could have introduced you as that. Yeah, well, I think, I mean, if you work with like-minded people, then you're just going to naturally have that connection. And it's great about entrepreneurship is you can kind of build a book of business of people who you relate with, and then you're just meeting with friends every quarter. Can you differentiate for me life planning versus financial planning? Like more specifically, what are you covering in a life plan?
Yeah, so financial planning is all IQ. Right? It's all numbers, it's quantitative, it's analysis, it's the math, right? And then life planning is EQ, right? It's emotional. It's understanding how someone can visualize what their future looks like. Do they have financial satisfaction in the major facets of people's lives? It could be their health, it could be their work, it could be their community, it could be their finances, it could be their inner growth, it could be their family, etc. So it's really getting a sense of how do they feel about this, and then how can we merge these together so that clients can live their ideal life, or at least we can try to put them in a position to retire 5 years early, to move to a different state or a different city, to start that business, to take that sabbatical, to spend more time with their family. So I think that's the key differentiator there.
How are you capturing that? And then how are you going back to it? Are you using goals, or like what is the, I guess, implementation around life planning?
Yeah, so I subscribe to a company called Money Quotient. I've been a Money Quotient practitioner now, I want to say a little over 4 years. And I did a series of their fundamentals of true wealth planning, aka life planning, with Amy Mullen, who's brilliant. And what they teach you at Money Quotient is how to merge that EQ and IQ. And there's a set of tools that they give you that you can use to help guide clients. So, for example, one of the first tools that a client will use when they come meet with me is a life transition survey. So they can check the box whether they have a major life transition coming up. It could be a new job, a new baby, a divorce, an inheritance, an illness, or whatever it is. So that helps guide those initial conversations without me even have to think about it. They're telling me like, hey, I am going through this transition, so we need to plan around this. Then there's other things like the wheel of life, where we look like again at those 10 major facets of life, and then they're ranking basically on a scale of 1 to 10 how satisfied they are in these major facets. And then that opens up conversation, and then from there, then we visualize it and we say, okay, well, let's just play for right now. What's a 10 out of 10 life look like here in this facet? Or what does 10 out of 10 look like here? And how would you envision this going? And I'm just basically listening to them and speaking back to them, what they're telling me. And if it's a partnership, if it's a couple, then it's interesting. You have one couple saying one thing, one partner saying one thing, one partner saying the other. And I've had couples tell me sometimes, or I had no idea he thought about that, or I had no idea she didn't like our community, or whatever it is. So that's just an example of how we flush out some of these ideas. And then once we paint the picture of their vision, then it's about sorting out the short term, the midterm, and the long term goals. And then we can use traditional financial planning and investments to get us to those goals.
That's a lot of qualitative information that you're capturing. So I imagine a big part of it is like, how do you translate that qualitative into goals? And then obviously the quantitative component.
Yeah. So I think, so it's a 2-meeting process. So the first meeting is kind of going through half the tools, and then the second meeting is really fleshing those out. And what's interesting is I position myself with clients as I'm just your partner. I'm a guide here, and I'm going to help you get to the mountain peak or what have you. You're ultimately the person that's in charge of your money. As one of my friends says, they're the hero of their money. They're the hero of their financial lives. I'm just a guide. So all I'm trying to do is partner with them. And then we create these goals together, versus me. When I first started, it was me as a planner saying, okay, if you want to retire at 65, you got to do this. If you need this amount of insurance, you need to do this. You need a will and a trust. You need a college fund. Instead of doing all that, it's more, okay, what do you want? What life-centric? What is most important to you and your wife? Or your partner? What's important for you guys versus this is what you need to be doing type of thing. So it's interesting because I always say everyone has a different life plan. And then we layer traditional financial planning on top of that, right? So eventually, yes, we'll talk about estate planning and tax and all that stuff. But it really is not going to make sense to do all this if somebody has, for example, an aspiration to take a 12-month sabbatical. Well, we're not going to be funding college funds.
I have aspirations to take a 12-month sabbatical.
Yeah. And we're going to have to make some cash flow adjustments and make sure that you can sustain that, and maybe forego some retirement savings that year. But we have to plan around that. So if I give you advice on retirement or savings, it's not going to make sense if you're trying to use some cash on hand to go, live in Guadalajara for a year or something like that. You know what I mean?
And that just feels so much more differentiating. That's like the true human element of advising. It's like, to some degree, traditional financial planning is deterministic, right? If you're a trained CFP, you're kind of, taking the same steps for every single client to make sure that they're checking all the boxes. But when you layer on life planning, understanding, who that client really is and what they specifically want, that's a lot harder to fit into a box. So that feels really powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's the future, honestly, of financial planning. I think at some point, the CFP board will probably have to require that be a course that potential CFPs take, because it's just so important. And I know there's, Money Quotient is great, but also I know there's the Kinder Institute as well. They do a great job at teaching people how to actually do life planning. So I've heard great things about both. One of my really good friends, Scott Frank, he runs an RIA here close by in town too. He does a lot of trainings for Kinder, and him and I always compare notes on Money Quotient versus Kinder, and they're both really good. And when at the end of the day too, the people that do life planning via Kinder or through Money Quotient, it's very similar. It's just EQ, IQ, and we have to try to merge those together.
Yeah, makes sense. So, and we have a question here from Catherine about your background. I'm going to save it to the end, Catherine, just so we are kind of maintaining the same thread here, but we will get to that here later on. So, Eric, you talked about the types of people you work with. I have like the, classic term here, niche. Is having a niche part of your consideration, and has it always been?
This is a good question. So I've changed my niche so many times. I mean, I first off started with retirees because of my warm market. I was thinking, gosh, I have a lot of baby boomers in my warm market, and they all work at Hewlett Packard Enterprises, Apple, Lockheed Martin. I need to make a killing and build this huge business. But then what was interesting is a lot of my old coworkers from various jobs that were in sales, they started reaching out to me. And so I switched from retirees to working with high earning sales professionals. And then given the fact that I built my firm in the Silicon Valley, and so just organically started getting a lot of, people in my network that worked at, Facebook, Twitter, Snap, et cetera, that had a lot of equity compensation and they needed help with that. So then my niche pivoted to equity compensation. But over the past 2 years, an interesting dynamic has again organically happened is my clients that were Gen X, Gen Y, they started referring me to their parents. And that recently led me working with a lot of people that are either close or in retirement, early retirement. So I've been focusing on that niche because I really enjoy the work, and quite frankly, it's been very profitable, and it's been exciting to, work with those types of folks.
That's the reverse referral. Clients refer you to their parents, which is amazing because you already have a relationship with the kids.
Yeah, it's been nice. It's been really nice.
But that's probably impacted your process, right? Because now you're all of a sudden working with folks that have a totally different consideration set. Talking more about distribution strategies. I mean, how has that changed?
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful part about being a CFP is you have expertise in retirement planning and tax planning, estate planning, et cetera. So it's less of a goal-based type of financial plan like a younger person. And it is more cash flow based and figuring out, all right, where are we going to pull from retirement, Social Security strategy, how can we avert IRMA, what are we going to do for your estate, how do you want that structured, we need to figure that out. When do you actually want to retire, Medicare planning. So these are all things that we've learned as CFPs. We learned it in school, and just through working, naturally you're going to talk about this stuff a lot with clients. And I just feel like it just helps you refine that area a little bit more. But, in my opinion, that's where I lean a lot on tech to assist with that, because I feel like with technology now, and I know we'll get to this as well, but it really helps streamline the process. But yeah, it is a little bit different, but it's fun.
I'm just going to ask you, Eric, what tools are you using for managing like retirement phase clients, distribution strategies, whatever it might be? What specifically are you using?
Yeah, so I'll use Right Capital is my main hub. So that's my main financial planning software.
Yeah.
Also have Holista Plan to help with reviewing tax returns and figuring out if we need to go in more depth with tax. We'll use Holista Plan. And I'll use wealth.com for estate planning. Those are 3 of the key pieces of tech I use to help with these retirees.